Kyle is a student in his final year of the Master of Divinity program at University of Northwestern, where he completed his Master of Arts in Theological Studies in August 2017. A California native, Kyle was ordained in 2015 by the Gathering Place Church in San Diego, California, where he served in college leadership, military ministries, and worship. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Communication from California State University, San Marcos, in 2004, after serving 4 years in the U.S. Army. Kyle is passionate about teaching and ministering the love of Jesus Christ and currently works in the care ministry to senior adults at Calvary Church in Roseville. His goal is to serve as an Army chaplain. Please welcome Kyle Otto to the Graduate Student Symposium.
I had such a longing for virtue, for company. I wanted Christ to be as close as the cross I wear. I wanted to read and serve, to touch the altar linen. Instead, I went back to the woods, where not a single tree turns its face away. There is an instinctive longing within us to touch the sacred, retreating to places of divine encounter where we may dwell unguarded, accepted, holy. With busy lives and little room to reflect, intentionally seeking the space that we yearn for is indispensable. Well, good evening. The subject of my presentation is Tabernacling with God. Studying sacred space in the Pentateuch led to a deeper understanding of how God chose to reveal himself through history in order to dwell with his people, that they might know and love him. We'll look at the sacred spaces of the Tabernacle and the Garden of Eden, and find what sets them apart and how they're connected through Jesus Christ. And finally, we'll look at what sacred space looks like in our lives today. Sacred space, simply put, is a place that's set aside from what is common as holy. From its inception, Israel was set apart from the pagan worship of the nations that surrounded it by sacred space, with the true God at its center. The presence of God is the central aspect that transforms common space into sacred space and sanctifies his people from sinful rebellion into a holy priesthood. When God is no longer present, holy ground becomes common again, as with Moses when he saw the burning bush. "Do not come any closer," God said, "for the place where you are standing is holy ground." And this is seen also in the altars that the patriarchs built to mark when and where and how God revealed himself, especially to meet with them on holy ground. The concept of sacred space is most clearly seen in the tabernacle in the wilderness of Sinai. The word tabernacle coming from the Hebrew mishkan, meaning dwelling place. Following the exodus from Egypt, God told Moses, "Let them construct a sanctuary for me that I might dwell among them," as he had promised Abraham. And so, thus, the laws surrounding the tabernacle are understood as a fulfillment of God's covenant promise to be with Abraham's descendants. The term covenant, from the Hebrew berit, signifies a kinship relationship bonded by an oath of loyalty. A close parallel may be seen in the Hittite treaties of the 14th century BC between kings and their vassals, which featured mutual terms of promises and conditions which define the relationship. God fulfilled his part by making a way for the Israelites to meet with him. Worship and obedience, then, are seen as a covenant response of thanksgiving on the part of the people. The Ark of the Covenant at the center of the tabernacle serves as a concrete token of the divine presence, containing a copy of the covenant, signifying God's promised presence and covenant loyalty, or his chesed, often translated as unfailing love. Like the kings of the ancient Near East who lived in a central tent of a war camp and marched into battle ahead of their armies, the ark went ahead of the people into battle, representing the covenant king who won the victory. Well as a tangible sign of his presence, the tabernacle is a visible picture of the revelation of God's holiness. This is seen in several ways. Firstly, through the construction of the tabernacle. Firstly, through the construction of the tabernacle and its distinct use of precious materials, so from gold and silver and bronze metals to blue and purple and scarlet yarns, and intricately woven into embroidered curtains to set it apart from what is common. And so these materials were used as increasing gradations of quality, proceeding from the outside of the camp toward the most holy place, so that the closer one got to the center, the more consecrated it became. The tabernacle complex itself is partitioned into areas. Only covenant members could enter the camp and the courtyard, where the tribe of Levites were to assist ritually clean covenant members in offering sacrifices at the brazen altar. Secondly, inside the courtyard is the holy place, and there priests alone could enter. The Levites were assigned to only guard the tabernacle. And finally, in the most holy place, only the high priest could enter once per year on the Day of Atonement. This is where the glory of God, or his chabod, that is his power and his majesty, was revealed, and also yet still concealed within the cloud of incense that was offered by the high priest there. Well, as a further revelation of divine holiness, priests were consecrated for 7 days by the blood of bulls and anointed with oil before they could serve in the tabernacle. The cost of sin against holy God is life and demands a sacrifice for each. The book of Leviticus also contains meticulous laws for sacrifice and for purity to ensure the holiness of the community. But it's important to note that God said, "I am the Lord who sanctifies you." So while the law prepares his people to meet with him, it is he who ordains and purifies them. Well, all of this conveys and magnifies the holiness of God, his otherworldliness. He is, as creator, he transcends his creation and lives in unapproachable light. Also his absolute purity, as symbolized by the gold furniture and walls inside the temple. As Habakkuk said, "Your eyes are too pure to look on evil." And thirdly, he is always righteous. Psalm 97:2 declares, "Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne." So we see that the law flows from the moral character of God. His commands for his people to be holy included righteousness and justice. For as he said, "Be holy, because I am holy." Next, we'll look at some aspects of temple as sacred space. In the ancient Near East, temples were considered the resting place for the gods from wars and from work. So the word for resting place from the Hebrew menucha in the Bible indicates a permanent dwelling. As God said, "This is my resting place forever and ever. Here I will sit enthroned." There are many parallels in the tabernacle and the temple which point to a connection to God's heavenly dwelling place as his temple in the cosmos, and strikingly also remind us of Eden. We find some parallels to these symbols in Egypt, where one pharaoh reported the temple to Ammon in Thebes as reflecting the horizon in heaven, with blue for the skies and gold for the stars, closely resembling the blue yarn woven into the tabernacle, and later the gold walls and ceiling in Solomon's temple, which remind us of the heavenly city in Revelation 21. Also, we see the palm trees, flowers, and pomegranates overlaid with gold, which adorn the inside of the temple walls, also symbols of Eden, as are the cherubim embroidered into the curtains, mirroring the heavenly throne where angels surround God and worship, and may also reflect the guardians of the Garden of Eden after the fall. And finally, we have the menorah, that is the gold lampstand with the 7 lights that stood before the most holy place. This was an ancient Near Eastern stylized symbol for the tree of life, as we find in the center of Eden. Well, while these symbols in the tabernacle and in the temple, they point us to Eden as the first temple of God. Eden, the word from the Ugaritic, gives us the idea of garden of abundance. This is the ideal, containing every fruit tree and an abundance of jewels and gold, much like the temple and the heavenly city. In the creation account of Genesis 1, the word used for heavenly lights is only used in the remainder of the Pentateuch for the lights in the menorah, implying the cosmos as a temple and Eden as its microcosm. In Genesis 2, we find that God rested on the 7th day, just as the temple is a divine resting place. And the Hebrew Shabbat, translated Sabbath for rest, does not entail relaxation, but rather completion, or to cease, to sovereignly rule as from a throne. Also, usage of the verb nuach, that is, to rest, conveys that God placed or rested Adam in the garden, suggesting that, like God, who rested to cease his labor in order to rule, mankind would take dominion and be fruitful and multiply and expand the temple to fill the earth. Here, Adam was placed as the archetypal priest in order to serve and to keep or guard. So more than mere groundskeeping, this is priestly service. The same verbs are used, abad and shamar, together to indicate the Levites guarding the tabernacle, showing us that this is indeed the dwelling place of God, evident in that God walked back and forth, Genesis 3:8 tells us. The same verb form is used to describe the presence of God in the tabernacle. In Eden was a perfect and free relationship between God and mankind. There was no veil. They were naked and they felt no shame, we're told. This is the ideal sanctuary, where God and man were dwelling together in perfect harmony. Sin changed that relationship to fear and shame and hiding from the divine presence. It's for this reason that God purposed to send his son Emmanuel to be God with us, to restore the dwelling among mankind. As John says, the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. He uses the Greek word skanu as a verb, tabernacled, to mean dwelt among, pointing us back to the tabernacle and showing us that Jesus Christ himself is the tabernacle, just as he is the temple in Revelation in the heavenly city. Christ is the fulfillment of the shadow of things to come, both transcending his creation as God and entering into it as man. By his death on the cross, he is the perfect and final sacrifice. His blood fulfills the holy requirements of the law permanently. Secondly, he is our great high priest, without sin and anointed, who enters into God's holy presence on our behalf. Thirdly, he clothes us in righteousness so that we can become accepted and holy as a priesthood. And finally, like the ark containing the covenant, he is the victorious king in our midst. The new covenant in his blood we receive by faith in his sacrifice, so that his life is within us. So what does sacred space look like for our lives today? Well, today he dwells with us by living inside of us by his Holy Spirit. We are living stones built together upon Jesus, the cornerstone, into a holy temple. God's Spirit now is in our inner person. As A.W. Tozer said, we need never shout across the spaces to an absent God. He is nearer than our own soul, closer than our most secret thoughts. We meet with God now in the secret place, a place intentionally set aside, acknowledging that we come into the presence of our holy God. Yet also, meeting the longing of our souls, we are accepted in his presence as we are, covered by the blood of Christ, clothed in his righteousness and unashamed, no longer in hiding. We meet with him here through prayer. As Jesus taught his disciples, go into your inner room and pray to your Father who is in secret. By faith, we believe that he is present with us and hears us. And through worship, he inhabits the praises of his people through our worship, through our word and our song there in secret. And doing all this while resting secure in him, trusting the all-sufficient one to bring completeness as we cease striving and wait on him alone. And like the patriarchs of old, we can raise altar stones to mark and remember sacred spaces when and where he meets with us in special ways. Also, of course, we come into his presence with fellow believers, together as one body. Well, whether alone or together as one body, we offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Well, finally, by holy living and sharing his love and gospel with the world, we honor his name to take dominion for his kingdom, like Eden, to fill the earth. And in the words of the medieval Irish hymn, Be Thou My Vision, he is our shield and sword for the fight. He is our delight and our soul's shelter. He is our tabernacle. When and where we set aside space to meet and rest with him, to live for him, he is our sacred space for today. Thank you. Well, if there are any questions, I'm standing here for them, unless you'd like to get food. No questions?
So, you're talking about this, God is everywhere. I'm hearing God's omnipresent, yet there's sacred space.
Right.
How do you see that working out in the context of a believer today? Are there spaces or contexts that are more sacred in our lives?
That's a really good question. Yeah. That's a very good question. I benefited a lot from seeing the altars. Like I mentioned, the altars built by the patriarchs. Long before the temple was built or the tabernacle was constructed, the altars were built by the patriarchs whenever God showed up to meet with them, like when Abraham encountered God, or when God came to Jacob and he wrestled with Jacob. You find examples of where God is coming to specific individuals and he's meeting with them in particular ways. And of course, he hasn't stopped doing that, and now it's far different because we don't have a temple. We are his temple, and we don't have a physical temple. The question is really, you're asking, do we have to go to a specific place? Jesus taught to pray in this secret place, but he also went out to the wilderness. He went to the mountaintop to meet with the Father, to pray there. So we shouldn't think of that as the one place we can meet with God. In the context of that scripture, we're talking about not showing it to other people. But the point is really meeting with God alone with him and coming to a place where we can connect with him. And that's why I think it's really important to emphasize setting aside that sacred space, because really it comes down to where we want to honor God. And we want to honor God in the way that worships him. And really, he's the one who gets to set those parameters. But we need to seek him intentionally and ask for the way that he wants to be honored, because he deserves that. And that's the whole point, is he's a holy God. And I think it's really important for us to grasp how dramatic it was that the tabernacle was placed in the middle of the desert, and all these partitioned areas were sectioned off, and each of them had increasing gradations of quality to show that his holiness is very special in a very specific way and place. That is still true, but Jesus has torn the veil so that we can come into his presence wherever we are. But he's no less holy. We are simply accepted now into his presence by Jesus' blood. So that ought to tell us both parts of the equation there. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions?